Go ahead and tee us up. We're going to start this. Crumble Michael.
Crumble Michael.
Yeah. What would you consider too much volume of a movement or movement pattern? And that's where we're going to start today, Mr. Ruth.
And this question is going to be our whole podcast. Let me give a lecture.
I feel like the answer to this is that in depth. So what would you consider too much volume of a movement or a pattern? I think it really depends on the athlete and what they are competing for. And to be clear, I'm talking about athletes and not GPP or fitness people. But when in terms of training athletes for a sport, you got to look at the volume that's required for the sport, and you need to probably overshoot that by a little bit. And if you overshoot that by more than 10 or 15%, you're probably in the realm of too much volume of a movement pattern. And that would be both within the context of a training week and within the context of a training day.
I think one of the hard things in CrossFit is that the volume has continued to go up over the years and it's unknown. So it's like, well, one year maybe they only test 80 toes to bar in a qualifier, and then the next year it's 120 in a qualifier, and then the next year it's 60 again. So how do you guys pick the volume based on the athlete?
I have been caught down with my metaphorical pants down. That didn't come out the way I meant it. Yes, I've been caught with my programming pants down at the CrossFit Games many times because you think that there's a reasonable level of volume. And every year that Dave Castro programmed from like 2013, 14, 15, every year more came out. And I think the CrossFit Games was my programming model of like, what's the limit of volume that somebody can handle, at least for the elite athletes. From there, I think my kind of bias is just paying attention to people. Like, it's too much volume if they're sore all the time, if they're beat up, if they're not progressing. And that's what I usually use as my threshold, is feedback from the athlete directly.
Yeah, it's kind of a two-way street there, because you have to make sure that you're training your athlete to meet the demands of the sport, but also you've got to listen to your athlete so that you can slowly like build them up to that demand.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you guys. What if they are reporting back that they're sore all the time, but they still continue to make progress from cycle to cycle?
Did you submit your question to the Instagram?
You mean like local muscular joints, all that stuff?
I mean, this may be someone that comes in and like they are relatively like resilient in a broad context of tests, but like me, like my biceps are wrecked if I do chest to bars, but I can still go the next day, or my legs are really sore after a squat test, but I can still do another training session. And let's just assume it was me, and I'm getting better from week to week and then cycle to cycle, but I'm always reporting back to you that I'm sore. What do you do with that situation?
I think it's definitely athlete dependent, and the longer that you've been working with somebody, you've probably worked through these situations before. Also, what is sore? Is it the bicep? Is it their knees? Is it their shoulder? Like, there are certain joints that I think are bigger red flags you need to be careful about. Bicep soreness, if somebody hasn't done chest bar in a few weeks and has 100, 120 in a workout, that's expected. They can probably work through that. But if they come in the next day and they're like, I literally cannot straighten my arm, you're like, okay, we probably need to take
That was me after Murph. I was wrecked.
Yeah. But that is a good question, because it's like, okay, what's more important, them continuing to make the progress in something or them keeping some longevity?
Yeah. Also, too, soreness is not always bad. I mean, if you're training and you're trying to get ready for the games, if you talk to Travis right now, I think almost every day he's sore. It's about managing what that soreness is, or realizing like, oh man, this soreness has been going on for now a week and he's getting achy, so let's put a deload in. So there is an aspect in this sport or any combat sport or like any high performance sport where you might just be a little beat up and you just have to be okay with it. But that becomes, for general population, that type of guidance I feel like does more harm than good.
Well,
so
to that point as well, I think the general population probably doesn't do as well discerning the difference between muscle soreness and joint pain. You know, those are that's something that a high level athlete like Travis is going to know about themselves. They're like, hey, I'm really sore, but I'm just sore. Or, hey, like my to Perrin's point, like my knees are aching, or my elbows are hurting, or my back. Yeah. And it's my spine that hurts versus spinal. Versus like, you know, if spinal erectors are sore, like that just happens from doing lots of sandbag to the shoulder or deadlift or something like that. But if your spine aches, like that's a completely different thing and probably should be respected differently.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you guys is you're getting reports from your athletes on a daily basis or feedback from them to know how to adjust volume. And then if someone's getting achy and then actually creating pain in the joints, it's probably a time to pull back.
Yeah, and if you're not progressing. So
Right.
you brought up the I'm sore, but I'm getting better.
Yeah.
There's also the very easy one that you're doing too much is that you're sore all the time and you're
And not
getting
getting
worse. Yeah, and it's like, well,
I've been there.
yeah. The number one kind of like lowest hanging fruit there is that you should pull back your volume and maybe you'll feel better and get better.
I think that's like the majority of the answer. Would you consider too much volume if you're doing a lot of something and you're not getting better?
Yeah,
that's
there
a
you go.
problem.
Yeah,
There we go.
yeah, there's your proxy.
All right, moving on.
Next question. What books, courses can I read to learn more about programming?
Education,
Yeah,
not training.
You got Kyle Ruth in here. Come on,
Guys,
pump it.
I'm going to take a
Get
nap real
started.
quick.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep this really easy. I think if you're a CrossFit coach, if you're coaching in the competitive CrossFit realm, our courses, the TTT coaching movement and TTT coaching strength, are the most applicable courses that you could take. I don't think there is anything else that exists right now that can teach you how to apply strength and conditioning principles to competitive mixed modal CrossFit sport. So that is, I think, your top layer.
If you want stuff outside of it, so that way we're not only plugging our own stuff, I think all of our stuff that we've created over time is a summation of everything that we've learned, I think, collectively. And there's tons of people out there. What I found, though, is a lot of the information is just segmented. So you might have to find weightlifting program from Catalyst, and you might have to find energy system programming from somebody who is a triathlon. And you have to do some work to try to figure out, like, okay, well, I have all these, little pillars. How do I now put it together? And the truth is there's just not that much science and research and experience of people educating in that realm. So there's just not a lot of options for programming for CrossFit specifically, especially at a in-depth level versus just at an affiliate level where there might be a little bit more education on that front.
With that being said, I think 2 books for me that did inform how I create periodization structures and taper structures were Periodization by Tudor Bompa, and then I think the author's name was Ingo Mujica, who wrote the Tapering and Peaking for Optimal Performance. Both books, while you're not going to be able to take the templates out of there and apply them to CrossFit, the general principles apply very directly to the periodization of CrossFit for an athlete.
You got any?
I was thinking about like the courses and the books. I feel like you're always going to read something or do something that's more specialized. So like you have people who program for strongman or teach strongman or Olympic weightlifting, and then we kind of consolidate that information into how it applies to CrossFit. But I think about Stuart McGill, if you have someone going through a low back injury, and then he also collaborated on a book called The Gift of Injury that kind of takes an athlete who was a high level power lifter and brought him back from back pain to performance. So those people who have kind of teamed up with high level athletes and have applicability into how to get someone to return to sport, I find a little bit more valuable.
Yeah, going outside of the sport of CrossFit, too, that I really like is Applied Speed Training, which is like a really short manual, but they have some really good protocols in there for people that need to just get a little bit faster or more explosive. And I've actually pulled a lot of those concepts and then put them into CrossFit programs for those that maybe are like really dampened by being endurance level athletes or style athletes. And then anything from Charles Poliquin is great. And actually you can use a lot of his hypertrophy work, modify it, and then use it for endurance based work for the sport of CrossFit.
Yeah, I didn't even, I didn't even think about that, but Poliquin principles and his like initial education was, I think, what permeated through OPEX, which then permeated through functional bodybuilding with Marcus Philly, and a lot of the principles on tempo, supersets, German volume training, German body composition all come from that Poliquin group, I think is what the company is called now.
And to that point, we've actually included a lot of that in the strength course as well. Same thing with Westside. So the Westside Book of Methods would be a fantastic one. I actually reread that when we were building the strength course, and I completely revamped the way that I used the reverse bands or like band assist training for the better for all of my athletes.
And Chris, you have a good video. Is that still on Barbell Shrugs YouTube? When you went up to Westside? That's, oh man, do you know what the video is called? People should go and watch. It's awesome. Banded
Cleans, wasn't it? Yeah, I remember that.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So go and watch it.
I do think one of the difficulty with some of the old books, though, is that some of the information is outdated.
Yes, and it's not super applicable to CrossFit.
Yeah.
So you have to make your own critical thinking of how do I take this and apply it to CrossFit, which as a plug,
fun, though.
we did do that for you. So you could you could skip that and just watch the course if you want. But
as a coach, though, that's been very enjoyable for me to try certain things. You know, you talk to the athlete, hey, you want to try this? This is a concept that is, again, going back to applied speed training. We don't do a lot of sprints in the sport of CrossFit, but if there's a method in there that I haven't tried before, I'm saying to an athlete, hey, I want you to be able to be a little bit more explosive. Let's play around with this. And if they're willing to, then that's a way for us to test and retest if it works.
Yeah.
Next question. How would you structure an off season for an athlete who is well-rounded, peaking for semis?
Should we assume that the tests aren't out? Like they're not?
Yeah, I would think so. It's an off season. We don't have any idea.
Fair. Yeah.
Okay. Perrin, you get to go first.
Man, I need information, first of all.
Yeah.
The well-rounded athletes are interesting because it's like, it seems very simple. You're like, oh, you need to get better at everything. But I think it depends what time you are in the year. Like, is this right after semifinals and you have an entire year to get better? Are you doing any off-season competitions? Because now athletes are leveraging some of the off-season competitions so they can't, in some ways, get too out of shape if they have to allow 6 to 8 weeks to prep for that. Typically, I would think like base conditioning and strength would be the two things that I want to start with the furthest away because they take the longest to build. If it's something more skill oriented or even like movement related, right? I need to get a change in your handstand position. That's also going to take a really long time. So whatever I would say takes them the longest amount of time and they have the most space between now and the end of the year, I would start with that. And then you build other things around it.
Yeah. I mean, the sport itself is becoming harder and harder to have an off season because competitions in the off season now are just as important to the CrossFit Games as a lot of people, or some people now at an intermediate level, their quote unquote CrossFit Games is actually a local comp that they maybe do at Wadapalooza or the Fittest Experience. And they're not really as concerned about the open and quarterfinals because they know they can't make semifinals. So I think it is very individual dependent, which is kind of a cop out of an answer. But I think for most people, it's base level, like getting yourself feeling healthy again, which is lowering your Metcon volume, rebuilding musculature that you probably lost because the training's very catabolic. So bodybuilding and strength usually come in, and then lower intensity base building. So those things usually comprise an off season. And then, you know, based on what they need, and this athlete's well-rounded, so they need all of those things. But usually you'll have like, oh, you got exposed by burpees and box jumps, so we need to do a lot of conditioning for this person in the off season. Or, you know, you got slammed by the heavy dumbbell step-ups and the weight that was in competition, so we're going to, you know, tend towards more bodybuilding and more strength work. So I think, like you said, it's really getting to know who the athlete is to be able to answer questions like this. It's hard to give an answer that would apply to everybody in the off season.
Well, one thing I would actually recommend that they do too. So even when you think that you're a well-rounded athlete, if you go and look at your performance results, if you look at the leaderboard, you're going to see that there are certain tests that were better than others. And you may be generally like falling, say you fell in like the 200 to 400 range in all of your workouts in quarterfinals. Well, I would argue that you're a well-rounded athlete, but the ones that were 200s obviously need less development than the ones that were 400s. And in a quarterfinals environment, improving those 400s does more for you than improving the 200s to a 150. So you might be well-rounded, but you at least have some idea of which dials you need to adjust to improve for the next season.
Yeah, there's still lowest hanging fruit. There's still movements you're not as good at or workout styles that you don't like as much, and still things you need to focus on.
And if you're at the semifinal level, right? So like Perrin said, if someone who just finished semifinals, then you also have to remember that the scoring's different there. And so you need to develop top end 100-point event type finishes.
Abilities,
yeah. So you also have to look at it rather than like, hey, I want to improve everything. It's like, what's my closest to a top 5? Let's really hammer on that as well so that we can capitalize where the big points are available.
Next one. Oh, Brandon, you ask and first to answer.
Yeah, when to transition from intermediate to RX. In our program, our online program, TDT Compete, we have an intermediate path and an RX path. And the way that we differentiate those two is the intermediate path is for those athletes that need to develop the skills in the sport. So like the common ones would be handstand push-ups, ring muscle-ups, toes to bar, chest to bar, handstand walking, you name it. You can go down the line, right? Mostly gymnastic skills that people when they're new to the sport don't have. Then our RX path is, hey, you have all these skills, you're able to do 3 to 5 reps of each of them, and you can handle an open style workout as prescribed. So if an open workout comes out and it has bar muscle ups in it, you should be able to do at least a few of those bar muscle ups to be able to go into the RX path. Now, if this athlete's talking about intermediate versus RX in like a Wadapalooza competition, that's going to be a little bit different because they still test some of those skills. But I think in general, when you're looking at intermediate to RX, you should be able to have every single one of those skills, the main skills in the sport that are tested, and be able to do sets of those in a Metcon.
Yeah. Intermediate in intermediate in Wadapalooza is actually a pretty high level athlete.
Yes.
It's probably closer to an RX level athlete. So this is assuming this question was about our program and you're an intermediate athlete, you move to RX. Basically the answer is when you can, when you have the skills all developed that you can handle the training.
Now, there is one caveat to that. There are many people that come into our program that maybe have all of the skills but ring muscle ups, all the skills but strict handstand push-ups. And for those athletes, when I reach out to each person that signs up for the program, and I just say, hey, where are you at? What skills do you have? What do you need? And if they told me that, then I would have them go into RX, and then they would just add on our skill program. So they could add on strict handstand push-ups as a skill program. So they're still getting all of the high quality training in RX, but then they're just practicing their handstand push-ups on the side.
Should we just answer every question from now on with it depends? It depends on the athlete. We can make this podcast real quick. Next question. What is something What is something athletes perceive as pushing the needle but doesn't, and vice versa?
Okay, I have something that I think I can throw out here for that. So
this is for something that they think is pushing the needle but isn't?
I think that there are a lot of athletes who think that just burying themselves on ergs is going to translate to better endurance in CrossFit. Brandon and I have done multiple podcasts. He's
dying.
He's choking.
Bad choice to drink during the podcast.
We've done multiple podcasts where we talk about the fact that like you can't just do hard cyclical or monostructural conditioning and expect it to one-to-one improve your CrossFit endurance or conditioning. You have to go in, you have to do mixed modal stuff. You have to test it. You have to train it in the CrossFit environment. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm just going to go on this really hard erg plan and my endurance and my engine is going to get so much better. No, that's just one piece of the puzzle that's required for you to actually build a better engine. There you go.
I was going to say intensity, but I'm going to pick something else because you kind of said that. I would say progressing volume in too many things at the same time. So say you actually do need to become more tolerant at volume, the burpee box jump over wall ball workout from the open, but you also need to get better at gymnastics tolerance and anything else. And you try to do all those things at the same time. And now you just have an abundance of volume where you're going into all your sessions fatigued. There's other and better ways to create pre-fatigue, crash course, than just adding reps. And I think looking at a test like 5 rounds for time where you have 150 reps of 3 different movements, you think that I just need to progress that volume linearly where you could add other stimuli in order to do that. So I see that happening a lot with athletes, especially if they might be coming from a program that kind of biases higher volume, which is fine. Sometimes you do need that because I don't think you can simulate 150 burpee box jump overs, what that's going to feel like. But that doesn't necessarily mean do you need 300 in a training session to get good at 150.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the opposite answer. I'm going to go with a thing that athletes don't perceive moves the needle, so they don't do it, that I think really does move the needle. And that's just basic movement work. Proper warm-ups, working on your technique, working on your footwork of when you're doing burpees. I think it's very common in the CrossFit space to go hard. And it's actually one of the things that I admire about the community, I think, because I sense my own softness of not wanting to go hard sometimes. I think most CrossFitters at the competitive level are very tough, but sometimes they can lack mindfulness of being like, hey, if your snatch was 10% more efficient, then you would go faster on a snatch workout than doing a benchmark with snatches in it every single week where, yes, it hurts, but you're moving so inefficiently that you're using too much energy. So sometimes as people get better, they stop realizing that the basics should always be a priority because there's always something to refine. Like golfers are always working on their swing mechanics. Archers are always working on how they draw the bow. I think CrossFitters sometimes are not working on the skills and how to refine them once they get to a certain level of like, oh, well, now I'm good enough to be RX. They just think it's like, I've learned how to snatch already.
I think to your point as well, improving someone's movement in a snatch by 10% actually moves the needle more than developing their top end strength by 10%.
Yes.
Especially if it comes to barbell cycling. So there's that's something that people think moves the needle a lot, is developing top end strength for barbell cycling. And unless you can't hit the RX weights, you're going to have a pretty limited improvement from building top end strength.
Yeah. I think I'd round it out by saying when people do or focus on supplementation over habits. I'm going to take all of these things to help my performance as opposed to like just fixing your sleep hygiene, fixing your, maybe to your point, mobility and cool down routines, those kind of things. I've seen that happen. I mean, the sport is high intensity and you got to go hard. So you're always thinking about what's the edge, but a lot of times it's just like nutrition and sleep will help you more than anything else.
Yeah. Saunas, cold tubs, like we can just go through.
And all of those things can be great, but if you're sleeping 5 hours a night and not taking care of your nutrition, then you're out of luck.
Yeah. People are taking sodium bicarb in workouts and not eating. It's like, that's probably not the way to do it.
It turns out you need some carb before you need sodium bicarb.
Next question. How to go from competitive to training for life. How to make that mental shift. Beautiful.
That's a good question.
I have no idea because I haven't done it.
I've done this.
I've done it.
And I feel like it takes time. Like, I don't think it might be a decision of how you change your habits overnight, but I feel like it's not like you just stop becoming an athlete or don't identify with being an athlete anymore. And like, even as my fitness regressed and I would do something like an open workout, the expectation is that I can perform at a level that I cannot perform anymore, yet does not change my strategy when I blow up in the first 30 seconds of a workout. So
For me, I think it was really important to realize that it's not a black and white and that it's a gray. Because I went from, okay, I'm going to compete. I was really egoic thinking like, okay, well, if I compete and I do well and I show what I know with my body, athletes will trust me more. And it was kind of after I transitioned from athlete mode, it was kind of something that I thought was important in coach mode. Then I got to the point where I was like, people don't really care. I need to just get healthy. So I shifted all the way into focus for like my mental health, reframing things, focus on the business. And then I realized over time, like, man, I'm not motivated the same if I'm not doing something quasi competitively. So doing things like Miko's triangle progressions and doing them with competitive athletes, or going and playing golf and finding little ways to get that competitiveness out while I'm training for life has been very important for me. Realizing like, hey, you can still be competitive and not a quote unquote competitive CrossFitter. There's something in between those two things.
What about you, Brandon? Because you have embodied the person who doesn't compete but also is extremely fit.
I think sometimes it's probably my attitude towards it is different, so it's hard for me to give advice. But the way I still want to be very competitive, but it's internalized now. It's competitive with myself. I think I'm still good at, and this may sound egotistical, but I'm good at challenging myself with targets or goals on things that I want to do over the next 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. And I can kind of live and die by that. You know, I always hear people have heard, like, you're either going to regret or have the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. And for me, I just want to have the pain of discipline. Like I love to live by that. And I think that has continued to motivate me to still work hard, but also my priorities need to stay in line. And so like if my priorities are family, job, and then my fitness, or obviously there's things in between that, but just let's say that's the case, family still comes first. And so I don't want to go out there and just do a bunch of hard stuff and then be sore and not be able to do certain things that I want to do the rest of the day with my kids. So I adjust training based on that so that I still am competitive with myself, but I'm also doing things that help me with my health and longevity long term.
I think it really is just a mental shift. You just need to go in and develop awareness as to what your value system is, how important is competing, really asking the question of like, well, if you're so competitive and the leaderboard's so important to you, why? And really answering that question for yourself. Over time, everybody makes the shift. Like there are very few people in the world who are 70-year-olds with grandkids and businesses who are like hard charging their training as an athlete still. Some people do, but most people don't. But they were once athletes. So I think it's just realizing like, hey, this is normal. Go in, do some introspection and figure out what's going to make you happy. And if competition isn't doing that for you, that's the time to make the mental shift and keep the good parts of it without like letting the drawbacks take away from your life.
Also, to your point, it doesn't have to be black and white. right? You can continue to compete for as long as you want, as long as it's something that you find enjoyment in and find fulfillment in. You don't have to necessarily enjoy it, but you have to find some fulfillment in it.
Max, this is more so for you. How do you, do it along these lines. Like, how do you handle it when you choose to be competitive in something else, like golf, and, then you just constantly lose at it?
That's when I say that I'm training for life.
Yeah.
Next question. In your experience, can anyone make it to the games, or do they have to have it? They got to have it.
Yeah, they have
Period.
to have it.
That's it.
Yeah.
This could be an easy question, Chris. Should we elaborate on it, or is that good?
At what point?
What is it? Yeah, what is it?
Chris said, what is it?
Okay, from a physical and physiological perspective, someone's got to be able to adapt to strength training well. Not everybody can adapt to strength training well, and they have to have a very high VO2 max. Those two things are both necessary, but they are not all of the things that are required. I'm going to let someone else chime in on some of the mental stuff, but from a physiological perspective, that's required.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, to like simplify it, make it non-science-y, is like you have to adapt to all types of training in a positive direction. And
not just adapt though. They have to have a genetic set point, like with VO2, you can change that maybe 7%. So genetically, you have to already be gifted.
Yes, true. But if you're adaptable in those realms, you probably have the gifts, right?
Well, someone who has a 50 milliliter per kilogram
will adapt, but not get there.
Yeah, they're going to get to 55 or 60.
Yeah.
And it's good, but it's not sufficient to be competitive at the top level.
There's also structure and size profiles. If somebody is 5 foot, a male athlete is 5 foot, 135 pounds, the likelihood that they're ever going to develop the level of strength required to move the bar is pretty low.
Especially now.
Yeah. If somebody's 6'7", 240, you're getting crushed on burpees and muscle ups and handstands. Like it's impossible. So I feel like you have to fit within the realm of size profile. You have to have the right physical genes. And then I think the mental side in this sport, I think, is the big one. You have to be willing to work very hard almost every single day for years at a time, other than your off days, which are still hard work because you're still eating and recovering and stretching and meditating and journaling. Like, this isn't a sport where you can like rest on skill. It's a very capacity driven thing. So you got to have the mental switch. Kind of what Brandon said. I don't know if I am as good of disciplining myself specifically to pain, but you have to be able to deal with it. Brent Fikowski said that on our podcast, that he thought it was a big separator.
And you have to be able to perform under pressure, because how many athletes this year did not qualify and they're more than capable of making it? Or you have to be so physically gifted that your mistakes don't hurt you enough that you get
There aren't
through.
many of those though.
Yeah. Okay. Is that good enough for the its? All right. We got the thumbs up.
Hold on. This is a follow-up with this.
Go back, Chris.
Just because I'm curious, when did that change? When did it, in the sport of CrossFit, since they started the games, did you have to have the it to make it?
I think 2015 Super Regional was the start of that.
Okay.
2015-16.
I think it was before that.
Really?
I'd say probably 2011.
Really?
I don't think so.
No?
Because you still had like the Weekend Warrior, I'm doing.com. I mean, they might have been lying, but I'm doing.com. I'm also a lawyer, like, that were making it.
Yeah.
But they still had it. They just didn't have, now you have to have it, plus you have to have a full-time lifestyle almost in support.
You could actually argue they had it more.
Yeah. I mean, their genes to be able to tolerate.
Although the scores then were like 40% slower than they are now.
Yeah.
So
the it factor was just lower.
That's why I'm going to stand by 15-16. When they shifted to Super Regional, they made it a lot more competitive to qualify.
The prize purses were starting to go up. All right, that's fair enough.
Thanks.
What is the hardest thing to build for an athlete? Strength, skill, or endurance?
Go ahead and do it. It depends again.
I know.
We can do this. Okay, so I'm one of the avatars. Mike's one of the avatars.
Yeah.
And then pick someone else. Yeah, Max is one of the avatars.
Actually, no, hold on. Me and Mike are the same.
That doesn't fit well. We need someone with the skill, maybe a skill limitation here. Okay, Mia. All right. So you're writing for all of us. Just kind of give an example of who we are and then like what you would think, what we would need first.
Okay, since Mia's not in the room, Mia's the one who comes in, who needs to build strength. She has an endurance background already from competitive sport previously and needs to develop a ton of skill because,
gymnastics
skill was not something she ever worked on in any of her previous sports. So her program was going to look like, and actually I wrote her program for a really long time, but it was probably like 40 to 50% gymnastics skill, probably 30-ish% strength. And then the rest of it was sport and endurance kind of mashed into one thing. Brannon, who, yeah, I don't know if you're a good fit here, but he had a massive engine.
Well, right now, still big engine, but don't do any strength work.
Yeah, no strength work. So if I'm trying to make him a competitive CrossFitter, the first thing we're going to have to do is build, like Perrin referred to earlier, base strength. He's got to build some basic strength volume in order to just be able to handle what's necessary to train for the sport. He's going to have to get back into squat cleans and squat snatches and overhead squats, things that he doesn't do a lot of right now. He might squat, but he doesn't do sport squatting. We'd have to rebuild that volume first, and that's going to be a huge component. And Brandon might not do any like erg endurance work. He's so far, off the spectrum on that end that he might just do some CrossFit, some gymnastics volume and skill to rebuild some of the stuff he doesn't do all the time, like chest to bar,
right,
since they make him super sore, and then a ton of strength work. That's going to be the primary thing. And we're going to listen to his knees, and we're going to listen to his points and make sure we adjust. For Max, it's going to be the opposite of Brandon. So there's going to be very little strength work, enough that he can still keep a feel on the barbell, or Mike, but we'll use Max since he's in here.
Use Mike. He's stronger.
No, you're in here. You're in here. Feel on the barbell. I want to make sure that he still feels comfortable getting under a snatch, still feels comfortable getting under a clean, but it's going to be as minimal of a dose as possible. Skill components, Max actually has really good.
I just would need to refine them.
And rope climbs and handstand walk. Like, he's really good at those things. It's just going to take some touches in Metcons. And then poor Max is going to do so much endurance work. And actually, I'm going to make him run. I'm going to make him run and run and run and run, because I think this is something we've talked about. But
when are you starting?
I'm never hiring Kyle.
Hey, you only hire me when you have a goal and you actually want to get there.
Okay. Mine won't include running and running and running and running and running.
Guess what?
Next, why are so many programs obsessed with volume? I mean, the truth is, it is important. Like, if you have to do the CrossFit Games and the athletes are running those programs, are CrossFit Games champions and have been at that level of volume, you do need to sustain that to be great at the sport. Like, so it does make sense. I think the obsession is probably because a lot of times it is super high level athletes that are writing them, and maybe not having as much experience seeing the variation of saying, okay, well, what happens if you're trying to apply training to somebody who doesn't have the it factor in all three of those categories? Then volume might not be the best thing to make people get better. But I think the obsession, it comes from a pretty good place, in that you do need to be very fit and very volume tolerant to be good at CrossFit.
Looking at it from another angle, volume is a good way to give people a lot of exposure to a lot of either different things or a lot of a single movement, so that they can develop economy and efficiency in those movements very quickly. Or if they're just new to CrossFit in general, it can be something where you give them a lot of exposure to as much varied CrossFit as possible, and it can get them better very quickly. There's also risks associated with it. And I think that's why, this is kind of phrased in a way that's kind of in the negative, obsessed with volume. But volume can be a really good tool for getting people better very quickly, even at the novice level.
Yeah. I mean, our programs are especially if you're following an elite program, are very high volume. The problem is, I don't think, or maybe in our defense, is we don't have an obsession with it. There are games athletes like, I won't call out names, but there are games athletes that we coach that excel on very low volume training programs and go to the games and their only volume is the games. But for most people, you got to do that work to be good.
Yeah. I think the only thing athletes need to think about is just making sure it's right for you. And the challenge is, you go into a program and maybe you want to do the elite path or the pro path in other programs. And so you do that, but then after a while you get broken down. I mean, you just can't handle that volume. That's probably just because you just don't need that much volume. And so I think most programs have done a really good job over the last 2 years in creating some different styles of their programs. Like, almost everyone now has, hey, here's like a RX level, and here's like an intermediate level.
30-minute.
Totally. And so just follow the one that keeps you healthy and keeps you progressing, like we were talking about earlier.
And keeps you engaged.
Yeah.
When's the coaching conditioning course estimated to release?
December.
Yeah, end of the year. That's our target. What would you say makes TTT different than the others? Our people.
Yeah.
That's one thing you can't replicate. I mean, methods are I think they're all drawn kind of from the same place in the market. I think that we've tried to do a good way of synthesizing it, teaching it, breaking it down for beginners, breaking it down for intermediates, pushing elites. So I think there's stuff that makes us have a competitive edge that I would lean on, but I think at the end of the day, it's really our culture that makes us different than others. If you like our culture versus another, that's what vibes with you.
Okay, here's something that I've always thought that I liked about it. Max has never taken like sponsorship money from a supplement company or from, whatever fad or whatever fad or gimmick is out in the market at the time. We've never gone out there and just promoted this thing or this supplement or what? We've never done that. And I think that people see that, at least I see that, but I think that in general people see that, and I think it creates some trust because we're not out there just shilling whatever the next product, this protein or that creatine or whatever it is. It's just, we're just out here doing good training.
Teaching training. Yeah.
I think we have the largest staff of full-time coaches, and I don't know if anyone else does education.
That's a good point. Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the people, right? Like our coaches actually care about the athletes and not just their performance, but also their own health, longevity, their relationships, the community that they're in. And, our mission in TDD Compete is to build a healthy, thriving community that's focused on fitness, but also their health and longevity. And I think that is kind of where there's a huge difference in just going out and performing for a couple of years and then your body being broken at the end of that, and someone that's like, I'm here to help you along the way so that you can have this journey or this fitness journey that leads you to a better place in 10, 20, 30 years. And that's what we're about.
Yeah, I agree with all that stuff. I would want to say, though, no matter what, I don't want to make it about at least this platform as being an us versus them. It's almost like, hey, this is us, and we're going to do our best to serve the people that are here, but like we're not doing it because we're trying to be better than another organization, or like we're literally just like, hey, this is who we are, and this is what we're trying to accomplish, and this is what we're trying to do with our team. Take it or leave it type approach. How far out do you program for an individual?
From linear progression source.
Yeah, probably less far than the linear progression source. Usually he's the source of all linear progressions.
Usually 1 week, unless we're in, getting close to a qualifier or getting close to a competition, then it'll shift down to about 3 days at a time.
Yep, same.
I've gone anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. My 3 weeks right now are generally just exercisers. They're people that are on, hey, I want to get better at X. I want to be able to do Y, and here's my training and my equipment. And those training programs can usually be progressed out for 3 weeks, and the athletes go through it without a problem because they're training 3 days a week. Whereas an athlete like Travis is training 3 times a day. So if I program out for 3 weeks, first of all, that's like 6 months of normal programming in terms of the number of workouts. And also like he could get a strain on Tuesday that changes the whole program. So going farther out with a high level individual athlete in the CrossFit space, I feel like is a waste of time that I've learned. But you can still probably maybe map out some basic linear progressions in endurance, or you can go out farther than a week. But generally speaking, in a week is where I stop.
Perrin, you've talked about what happens when you program longer than a week.
Every single time I get bitten.
Yeah.
Every single time I try, somebody gets hurt. No, I'm the same way. And even like if they're in a competition season or leading up to a competition, it'll be daily because things will change. I will say, like you mentioned, there are some progressions, like if you're doing cyclical progressions or strength progressions, you could do multiple weeks at a time or blocks of training, knowing that might shift down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. One quick note of our online programs, we'll have a template that's 6 months ahead of time. And then we just adjust that from cycle to cycle and then even like week to week based on the feedback we get in the program. But with those, you can have a little bit more structure because this is like the main template. We have a lot of people following that as opposed to it being getting feedback from one athlete on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's just a difference, I think, in group versus individual oriented programs, is that group programs have a structure that you follow, and it's on the athlete to work with our coaches to figure out how to modify it. When you're doing it one-on-one, that self-directed modification doesn't happen. The coach is just in charge of both things. They're writing the program and modifying the program if things don't go according to plan. Best advice to young coaches.
Great question.
Learn. Different for
Keep
everybody.
learning.
Yeah. Well, obviously learn as much as you can. I figured you would go down the route of like continuing education because that was something that you did a lot of. I was actually just asked this question on a podcast recently, and the thing that I went to was hire mentors, find people who have done what you want to do, and ask them questions, talk to them. It's one of the best ways that I've learned throughout my entire, thinking all the way back to when I was, young coach. That was what I did. I would reach out to someone like Vern Gambetta, and he was hosting a small seminar, and I just reached out and was like, hey, can I come? Just finished my just finished my CSCS and I'd love to learn.
Yeah.
And he was like, of course, come. So like getting into situations like that, I'd reach out to Max when I was first getting into CrossFit coaching. I was like, I want to learn. He had a seminar, went out, like you go and do those things and find the people that are doing or have done what you want to do and go learn from them.
Yeah. I'd say, since I said learn and you kind of reiterated or went deeper, I'd say also apply the information that you're learning to the people that you're working with and develop your own style. We were talking about before this podcast, like we're all TTT coaches, but we don't have a cut and way pace of writing. Everybody writes the training programs a little bit different, has a little bit of a different education. And I think that's something very important for coaches is that, or athletes, you can't mimic other people. Like if somebody else has a big presence, has a lot of aggression, or has a certain personality type, if you take all the same things that they do, but you don't have the same personality, it's not going to work and kind of like come together in the same way. So you got to figure out, hey, what are your communication skills? Why do people trust you? How do you break things down? Do you use more verbal cues, or do you do your cueing in writing? And if you pay attention to how you work and operate, I think it's really important to develop your own style if you want to be a coach.
Yeah, I would finish with have a reason for what you're writing. And those reasons can be wrong. Like you'll come back and be like, oh, I screwed this up. But having a plan in place, I think you're already a step ahead of most coaches. Or a better way to put it, just be like, if I'm looking at your program and I say, why are you doing this? Have an answer for that. And even if that answer is incorrect, you're, again, one step ahead.
I would say don't be afraid to challenge people. I feel like as a young coach, I was afraid I was going to hurt somebody, or I was afraid I was going to write something too hard that they would fail. But that's actually a really important part of the process if they want to get better. And don't be afraid to experiment. Like that was another fear of mine, that I would do something wrong or something wouldn't work. But that's how you learn. That's the only way you learn. And especially in CrossFit, it is not just like strength and conditioning. It is not just like triathlete training. Like it is so many overlapping things that interfere with each other. And everybody, as we talked about, genetically even adapts very, very differently. So you kind of have to figure out what's best for that athlete.
That's it.
Oh,
Speaking of young coaches, I know I just got an email from you, Kyle, about what did y'all just put out? What course?
it's the coaching strength under fatigue.
Is this good for a young coach?
Absolutely. So what we tried to do, just as briefly as possible, is create a system for, all right, you have an athlete, you've already built base strength, you've already built base endurance. How do you get them to start to be able to have fatigue resistance in a workout? How do you start to cycle barbells when you're in the middle of a Metcon? How do you start to do, speed work in the middle of a mixed modal workout? Or if you're an athlete that's outside of the sport of CrossFit, that's just a field sport athlete, like you still have to be strong when you're tired. And we basically laid out our system for building strength as someone gets more fatigued.
Yeah, I think in the general education world of strength training back in the day, it was all strength and all endurance. There was very few strength endurance methods of how do you get better. Then we get into CrossFit and it was like, hold on, wait, you have to be able to clean.
It's like half the test.
Yeah. You have to clean 315 or 225 for a girl while you're 20 minutes into a workout. You have to clean 95% of your 1RM. That was unheard of. And honestly, in the S&C community, they were saying it was just stupid. Like, don't do this. But over time, we realized like, wow, some of these athletes are actually like ex-weightlifters who are now getting stronger doing this style of training than they were getting when they were doing weightlifting by itself. Like maybe there's something to the volume or lifting weights while your legs are basically have no oxygen in them. So we started realizing that you could create training systems around the fatigue, and we basically packaged them up. And that's our almost like a lower cost entry point. If you're interested in like, how do you do strength training in CrossFit? You can look at that course.
Yeah, that's your starting point for strength training in mixed modal sport.
Oh, we got another.
And there were some other questions that we had that we didn't get to, but we sorted them in different buckets. There was a lot of mental related questions and then some just about the sport of CrossFit. So we'll do that another day. So stick around and stay tuned.
Stick around and stay tuned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.